The Indianapolis Colts are revamping their roster this offseason. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen this evening. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of horseshoehuddle.com. My partner, Jake Arthur, is our credentialed boots on the ground for the site as well. Now, the Colts have made a lot of changes so far this offseason, re-signing guys, signing guys to come in here from other places. We've had a lot of moving parts with this Colts team. So on today's show, we're going to dive into what those moving parts are on offense, on defense, and also talk about where the Colts could still add in terms of the draft or maybe the rest of free agency here. So kicking it off with offense, Jake, they have made a lot of changes on offense. It doesn't seem like they've made a lot of changes because we're not getting as many splashy signings on offense as we have seen so far on defense. But obviously the biggest move on offense is the change at quarterback with Daniel Jones. We've seen a lot of shuffling on the offensive line, losing Ryan Kelly, losing Will Fries. They waived Ryan Cole, which was such a funny first move that they made this offseason.
Yeah.
Also brought back Braden Smith, brought back Danny Pinter, brought back Wesley French. So they've made a lot of changes and a lot of moves here on offense. Jake, what really stands out to you so far?
Yeah, honestly, the biggest name they've made is someone you hope to never see, kind of like last year with Joe Flacco. Because in an ideal world, Anthony Richardson would win the quarterback competition. He never gets hurt during the season, and you don't have to see Daniel Jones other than in a supportive role holding the clipboard. But we know, that's not always how things go. And maybe Anthony misses a game or two. Let's say Anthony wins the competition and you see Jones out there for a couple games anyways. That's obviously the most impactful thing. I think it's going to be fine. I don't really think there's much better they could have done within a somewhat reasonable price. So it is what it is. We've talked about this being the offseason that it is as far as quarterback talent being available. You're seeing it across the league. Daniel Jones probably would have gone somewhere else if, his services were more available and people knew it wasn't basically just between Minnesota and the Colts. But honestly, things have kind of stayed status quo. And one of the more impactful moves that we might see is one they made this afternoon. That's Khalil Herbert. That's a good running back. Kind of underrated because Chicago hasn't been anything to write home about in the last few years. He got traded to the Bengals later in the season to team up with Chase Brown. There's some stuff going on with Zach Moss. So Herbert is a nice player. He's he's kind of more of a Tyler Goodson type than he is a Trey Sermon, Zach Moss type. But he's still, I think if I recall correctly, he's got some muscle, some power in the middle that he can still use, but he's much more of like a speed guy. Can catch the ball a little bit. But regardless, I think it's an upgrade for them in the backfield compared to what they had.
Yeah, the big thing with Khalil Herbert is he was kind of miscast in Chicago as getting RB1 snaps in a lot of times, and he's not really a number one running back in the NFL. He doesn't force a ton of missed tackles. He's not a good pass blocker. But what you get out of him is he's good at creating chunk plays, especially on toss plays and stuff. When I was going back and
wheel routes.
Yeah, well, no, I was charting all of his chunk plays that he gained with the Bears, and almost all of them were tosses to the outside. He turned those into 30, 40, 50-yard runs. So that's just something that's a big upgrade compared to what the Colts had last year, where the backups when they came in, like Tyler Goodson has a little bit of juice, but he struggles to stay on his feet sometimes and be consistent. Trey Sermon just didn't have any juice whatsoever.
Right.
So Khalil Herbert, at the very least, is an upgrade over RB3. So again, this is the competition we've been wanting from the Colts. It doesn't have to be these massive signings. Like a guy like Khalil Herbert, just upgrade your room and make your room better than what it was last year. So if he ends up being RB2 next year, you can live with that. But ideally, he's RB3 because you bring in a rookie draft pick to compete with him. So yeah, I like this signing. I don't think it cost them that much, and it's a guy who's had production in the past. So Khalil Herbert, exactly the type of signing the Colts need. And I think we'll see another 5, 6, 7 type of signings like this offseason because they just need bodies like that in the room. But the one thing I really want to refocus here on the offensive line, Jake, because again, the wide receiver room, no changes really. Wide receiver room is going to be the same. Tight end room, we've had some additions by subtraction with the tight end room. They still have avenues to address that this offseason, but the real changes are on the offensive line where, again, you're losing Will Fries, you're losing Ryan Kelly. Now, we ideally think that Tanner Bortolini and Matt Gonsalves are slotting in to be the starters at those two spots, but I still think there are some moving parts here on the offensive line. Like, if the Colts take a guard in the top 50 of this draft, then they might think it's better to develop Gonsalves as a swing tackle going forward and continue that development, or vice versa. They take a right tackle in this draft, then Gonsalves can purely focus on being right guard. But when you look at this Colts offensive line, like, they might have their 5 starters right now, but what they do with their depth can determine a lot of like the plan going forward with this offensive line.
Yeah, I like what they've done so far, and it's to a degree what they started to do last year, but little did we know they were just going to stop there. Now, so I like what they've done as long as they don't just stop there. Because let's just say it's Tanner Bortolini and Matt Gonsalves starting in the middle there. I like having Danny Pinter and Wesley French there in the middle as backups. They know the system. In the limited action they've seen, they've been okay, especially Pinter at center plays pretty well. But yeah, you have to bring in more competition. Like you mentioned, with the top 50 pick, Armand Membo, if he's available, any number of offensive tackles that could go in the first round. Marcus Bowe from Purdue, a guy that's inside out. Tate Ratledge is a guy we've been throwing around a little bit lately at Horseshoe Huddle. So I definitely think they need to add 1 or 2 offensive linemen through the draft, or if they take a cheaper veteran in free agency. But yeah, they can't just be done. Like, especially if Chris Ballard, if he just watched the Super Bowl, you can't just be done with offensive line. You've got to realize that your offensive line has to be the most ironclad group on your team. And then on the flip side, you have to have a relentless pass rush and penetrators to get in the backfield. So you can't just be done, but I do like where they've started. But you've lost some major contributors in Ryan Kelly and Will Fries. So you've lost something. So your replacements are there maybe, but then you have to replace what those replacements are leaving behind.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said, because if you look at the Colts offensive line right now, they have their 5 starters. Again, let's say Gonsalves is slotting in at right guard, but the 4 guys behind those 5 currently on the roster are Pinter, French, Dalton Tucker, and Blake Freeland. The Colts cannot go into training camp with those 4 as the primary backups, because like Pinter I feel okay-ish about. I'm still somewhat optimistic about Tucker long term, but I don't want any of those guys to be primary backups. Like Pinter, maybe he can be the primary center backup, but I need better backup guard. I certainly need a better swing tackle. And heck, it wouldn't hurt to have, a Gonsalves flip back out to be the swing tackle. And like, say, again, if they can make more money work, right as I was about to say it, this person comments here, but say they can get like a Mekhi Becton in here to be the right guard next season, then Gonsalves can purely focus on being the tackle of the future, the right tackle of the future. Because look, Braden Smith's going to miss time next season.
Yeah.
It's the Anthony Richardson thing. It's the Juju Brents thing. Braden Smith's going to miss some time next season. So if you can have Gonsalves focused on tackle and have someone else start at guard, that just makes your unit better. But they need to keep adding to the offensive line. I certainly think they will. I would fully expect at least 1 draft pick devoted there and another signing here coming. Maybe it's like a Chris Reed level signing, but another signing coming. But yeah, they can't stop adding at the offensive line, because right now I'm fine with the 5 guys who look like the starters, but you're only as good as your next man up when it comes to the offensive line. We saw the drop off on the Colts offense when Will Fries went down and Tucker had to step in. We saw the drop off when Smith and Ryman missed time, and Gonsalves, those first couple games as a rookie, had to step in there. It wasn't looking good early on for him. So you're only as good as your backup on the offensive line. You got to keep adding just quality bodies there. And then I think this Colts offense can go from there. Tight end, they still need to add as well. But offensive line, is something they can add in free agency. Tight end, I'm not too sure you can add much in free agency right now because there just isn't much talent there. That's more of a draft, I think. But when it comes to the offensive line, just keep adding in every single possible avenue to the O-line right now.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. And I will say they probably can't afford many more big ticket items, but they wanted Will Fries back. So they're willing to go to a certain point. So it doesn't have to be a teeny tiny person. Like maybe they can make Mekhi Becton work. We'll see. But guys, here in a moment, we're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball where we have seen some drastic changes there. This show is sponsored by Betterhelp. Taking care of your mental health can feel like a big investment, but it's just as important as taking care of your body. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, but with BetterHelp, you could save up to 50% per session. BetterHelp offers a flat fee for weekly online therapy sessions, making professional support more accessible and affordable. With over 30,000 therapists and over 5 million people helped, it's the world's largest online therapy platform. Guys, again, there's not much better investment than your personal health. Again, mental and physical. For me, I've not personally been to therapy, but let me give you a great example. This is free agency week. Monday night, I slept 4 hours. Last night, I slept 5 hours because I measure my worth in productivity. And that's probably something I should look into with something like BetterHelp. Your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, let's talk defense, Zach. I know this group has got you excited so far this year. They've lost some big names. Obviously, Dayo Odeyingbo. We saw the writing on the wall in the weeks leading up. The dude just got outpriced, signed a huge deal with Chicago that the Colts drafted and developed Dayo. They wanted him back to a certain point, but just too much to pay for that. Raekwon Davis, they cut him loose to give themselves about $6.5 million more in cap space. And then this afternoon, Grant Stewart, fan favorite, the Tasmanian Devil, he went to the Lions, which is such an if he wasn't going to be on the Colts, the only other place he could fit so well is Detroit, playing for Dan Campbell. So good for Grant Stewart. I hope he makes some plays out there and gets some playing time. But it's really about the additions that we've seen so far. Charvarius Ward, they get a bona fide top outside corner. Camryn Bynum, a free safety, a rangy playmaking guy that fits what Lou Anarumo really values in a free safety, fits that really well. And then, they did a little, tidying up and housekeeping at linebacker earlier in the offseason, re-signing Shegu Ulubi and Cameron McGrone. So they still have some moves to make on defense, but so far, so good.
Yeah, I really can't understate how big those signings were for Charvarius Ward and for Cam Bynum. I mean, look, again, we say all offseason that Lou Anarumo wants to be multiple. He wants to be diverse on defense, and that's why the Colts hired him. But if the Colts don't make these signings, you're not going to get that diversity. You're not going to get that multiple defense. You're not going to get more pressed man. You're not going to get 3 safety looks. All these cool things that we're excited about with Lou Anarumo. You don't get any of that unless they invest in the secondary and they invest in guys like Ward and Bynum. So these kind of big payouts, yes, they're risky. They're paying $120 million across 2 players. And quite frankly, Ward's not coming off a great season. I know there was a lot of reasons for it, but Ward isn't coming off a great season. Bynum has never been an all-pro caliber player, but you take these risks because you need to raise the floor and, quite frankly, the ceiling of this defense. So these 2 players allow the Colts to be multiple, allow them to be diverse, and it pushes guys like Nick Cross and Jalen Jones to where they don't have to be the best players in your secondary. And I think that's the biggest part of this. Your 2 guys who were supposed to be your strength last year because you just didn't have anyone else who could be your strength, now they can be your weak links. And when I see a weak links, I mean they're still average to above average starters, but if that's your weak link, you're doing something right in the secondary. So, I don't want to go too much on the secondary here because we've been so excited about these last couple of days in general, but gosh, these Ward and Bynum signings just pump me up so much because it's just really good defensive back play coming to the Colts. I mean, I've been covering the team since 2018, And in my opinion, I don't think the Colts have had a corner as good as Ward in that time period. And I certainly don't think they've had a safety as good as Bynum in that time period. So these are such big moves for the Colts. And I'm just so pumped to be able to watch both these players in Lou Anarumo's system next year.
Yeah, again, just because they're not all pros doesn't mean that they're not a large upgrade over what the Colts have had. And it becomes glaringly obvious after you see them play. It's kind of like in 2022 when Stephon Gilmore got there and you're like, oh, wow, that's what we've been missing since Vontae Davis was around.
Right.
You know, like you see that and you're like, oh, my God, yeah, this is what like super high level play is. So, again, I like we said, raising the floor and the ceiling because it was both needed. And for me, I think so far what they've done in free agency, especially on defense, is it alleviates the pressure from the draft class so much more. Because can you imagine having to go into the draft needing help in the secondary, both starters and depth, and on the defensive line? Because right now you don't have a backup tackle really, and you still need one or two guys at edge. And to have to fill the two most critical needs on defense in the same draft, that would have been a really tall order. You would have had to neglect one of them almost certainly. So their secondary is in pretty good shape. I have a roster that I fill out all the time with like a color map of what needs are. And the secondary really is only in need of some depth pieces right now. Like they could just about enter the season as is. But yeah, defensive line, they could focus on that now. They could take, you know, a nice little cheap option in free agency and then draft a couple guys, and then they'll be in a lot better shape. So they wouldn't have been able to do that if they wouldn't have invested in Ward and Bynum. And again, these, you know, Ward has had some nicks and knacks there, but like Cam Bynum hasn't missed a start in 3 years. So you're also investing in guys who have had pretty good bills of health as well.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think the secondary is looking good. Like, sure, I think they need a third safety still because I wouldn't put Rodney Thomas as a third safety. But aside from that, I think they're looking pretty good in the secondary. So now the attention goes to the front seven. I mean, as of right now, Zaire Franklin and Jalen Carlisle are your top two linebackers. Then you get to Shegu Alubi and Cam McGrone as the rotational guys. Like, that's just not good enough. You need to get in another capable starting linebacker. I think one of our comments threw the guy's name out there, Jahad Campbell. Of course, that's my favorite for sure. Love me some Jahad Campbell.
Jalen Walker.
Jahad Campbell. Yeah, Jalen Walker would be another one. Like, I do think that the Colts could be in the linebacker market in the draft or in free agency still. Their front four, their pass rush still could use some help. I know they've been pretty active calling some edge rushers, some inside out edge rushers in free agency. So I do expect a signing coming there as well. And one guy we haven't mentioned yet as a departure from the team, but we do expect him to not return, but he hasn't signed somewhere else, is EJ Speed. You know, we had a question here about thoughts on him not signing anywhere. Like, that is a vacancy that he's leaving on the defense. He's leaving over 100 tackles and multiple big plays vacant on this defense. Now, I don't think he's going to be back, but there is a void that needs to be filled. So I'm optimistic for Jalen Carlisle, but I don't want to put all that on a guy who only played like 6 or 7 games last year as a day 3 rookie, you know? So I do think they're going to be in the market for maybe a Jahad Campbell in the draft, or, you know, again, we haven't heard much movement on Jermaine Pratt from the Bengals. Maybe they cut him in a week or two and the Colts can jump in on that or something like that. Like, I do think there is other options that the Colts are going to go at linebacker to replace what they're losing in EJ Speed.
No, linebacker that's a position group that I'm not worried about at all because there are so many options to fill that one. There's guys I like all throughout the draft. There are cheap options and expensive options in free agency right now. You mentioned Jermaine Pratt. Like, I think obviously the Trey Hendrickson thing is dead at this point. There's just been too much money moved around, but Jermaine Pratt's still very doable. And again, they could elect to release him. The Bengals do tend to hold guys captive that don't want to be there, so we'll see. But they could even trade that too. You know, you give up like a 5th or 6th for Jermaine Pratt. Why not? If you would do that for, I mean, what would you pay him on the open market? Like,
well, that's the thing. On the open market, Pratt might get close to like $10 million a year, but if they trade him, you can get him at like 6. I think is what it would be a 1-year, $6 million contract. So say you flip like a sixth, or you do like a pick swap thing, like we
Mhm.
send a sixth and they send Pratt in a seventh,
Yeah.
and you get that contract and they get that cap space relief that they want. I think that could be something that could work, but we'll have to see. I haven't heard much movement on the Jermaine Pratt front. That was just a name that I think makes sense for the Colts, and that could be connected to fill that void at linebacker.
Yeah. And so obviously the thing we look forward to the most is the draft. And let's just pretend that free agency was done now, or that they're not going to make any more sizable moves. What do they still need to accomplish in the draft? March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening pretty much every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. And the FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, Zach. So I've highlighted a few areas here that I think are draft priorities. And there's really only like one area of the whole roster that's on red alert, and obviously that's tight end. Everything else is like you make a modest move here or there and you're set. Like, so the roster doesn't have many fires going on, but there's plenty of little areas throughout the draft that they could address. So let's start with the most obvious one. Again, tight end. You could throw some free agency into this one if you want, but how would you address tight end?
Yeah, one thing I want to make a quip about here is just Chris Ballard has gone so anti-Chris Ballard this offseason
Right.
that I'm shocked that there's still one gaping hole in the roster, because that is the most Chris Ballard thing. You know, he always has to pigeonhole himself into one position come draft day. There's always one position where it's like, we know you have to take it in the draft, because that's just what he does. So maybe he shocks us and he does the anti-Chris Ballard thing like he's done all offseason so far, and swings a trade for Michael Mayer, or signs a veteran on the market. I think Tyler Conklin's still out there on the market. Like, you can get him in here and make it so you're not pigeonholed into that position. But ultimately, like, look, they need multiple bodies at tight end. They just don't have the like quality players at that position right now. Like, outside of Drew Ogletree, they just don't have anyone that's quality or reliable at that position. Honestly, it's even hard putting Drew Ogletree in that kind of category as well. So even if they do sign a Tyler Conklin or trade for a Michael Mayer, they still probably need to draft one in the top 50, you know? So yeah, it's the biggest need. I think draft is obviously the big one that we're looking at when it comes to that. Ideally, you can get a Tyler Warren or a Colston and Loveland in round 1, or a Mason Taylor in round 2. But if the board falls a certain way and those guys aren't there, you still got to probably take one in round 3 or round 4. Maybe you take 2 after that on day 3, just to get some bodies in here. But tight end, obviously the biggest need. It's going to be a huge priority come the draft. And hopefully Tyler Warren can fall to 14 and we don't even have to talk about this anymore.
That would be nice. Yeah. So for tight end, I'm definitely grabbing 2. I think the perfect scenario is like you trade a 6-rounder for Michael Mayer, and you have an established NFL veteran, and then you could go draft someone. And it doesn't have to be like with the 1st or 2nd round. You can get, you know, Brenning Stool or Arroyo or someone in the 3rd or 4th round. Helm, your boy from Nebraska, I think it is Fedone.
Yeah.
The kid from Alabama who's on his, you know, his 3rd marriage. So, but I still would take, let's just say it's the draft. I still would take 2 in the draft, and ideally one of the first 2 rounds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
I could see it.
I wouldn't even hate it if you went like 1st round, 3rd round with tight end. Like, let's get weird with it. I'd be okay with it. So obviously tight end is a huge need. I also, if the Colts have intentions of going and getting 2, or like they go and get a free agent first and then still have intentions of drafting one, see what you can get for Drew Ogletree or Will Mallory. Go grab an extra draft pick. Why not? Or you could do survival of the fittest, best man wins in training camp. But I mean, what has that gotten you so far? Other than that, I do still think they need another quarterback, and it could just be bringing Sam Ellinger back. But if you wanted to spend like a 6th-round pick on a guy who you valued in the mid rounds or something, that's a possibility. I do think they need one more running back as well. And I didn't even know if they were going to sign someone in free agency. You and I, this is on brand for us. We mentioned Khalil Herbert being a good option, but that we preferred them to go in the draft. So, give me one Damian Martinez, Ollie Gordon, someone like that still, and I'm happy. But yeah, I do think they need to do more in the backfield, a QB3 and another running back.
Yeah, I think for me, when I look at what the draft strategy is currently, again, they could still go out and get a veteran linebacker. They could still sign a couple veteran offensive linemen. And then this statement here could change. But as of right now, I think the clear draft strategy is we need a tight end for sure. That's obviously number one. We just talked about that. But then I think the next biggest needs are linebacker and offensive line. I think that those are the next priorities, and then maybe defensive line after that, because right now they only have 2 working defensive tackles. Like, I'm hopeful for Adetomiwa Adebore, but again, we haven't seen enough in the NFL at this point. So offensive line, defensive line after that, but linebacker, tight end, those are the 2 biggest needs. And I think that kind of directly correlates to who could be there at 14, where when you're sitting at 14, if Tyler Warren or Jahad Campbell are there, the Colts will have a decision to make, but it's a good decision to make. 2 really good players there. But I think if both those guys are gone, then it becomes more of a conversation like, do we go O-line here? Do we reach for a pass rusher? Do we get the best defensive tackle available and develop them behind Grover and Buckner? But it's certainly less bleak than what it was going into free agency, because, again, coming into free agency, it was like they need a corner, they need a safety. Do you take Malachi Starks? Do you take Emin from South Carolina? Now it doesn't feel as pressing. Like, if those guys are blue chip guys on your board, certainly take them still, because blue chippers, you take blue chippers all day, every day. But unless they're that, you don't feel the need to reach for those guys. Like, you can take a trench player that you view higher. So I do think the draft strategy does change quite a bit here, but I certainly think linebacker, tight end are the pressing needs as of right now. And then just the trenches, keep adding to the trenches, defensive tackle, edge rusher, O-line right now. I do expect more veterans to come in at both of those sides of the ball. But as of right now, before those guys are signed, keep adding to the trenches. Like, keep getting young guys in there on the trenches, get rotations. And who knows, if you stumble across a hit, like, look, when the Raiders took Max Crosby years ago in the 3rd round, they didn't expect him to be this. So keep taking swings at pass rusher, keep taking swings in the trenches, and who knows what you'll find.
Agreed. And there is a guy they have, like Isaiah Land. I think it just feels like he's going to take another step. But again, you can't, like Chris, do not count on that. Like, you need to add more to it. If he does something, great. You've got other guys there as well. But I would also throw in, we kind of mentioned, a backup safety, not just for versatility purposes, but right now you're just looking at Cam Bynum and Nick Cross with Rodney Thomas, Daniel Scott, and Marcel Dabo behind him. That almost felt like quarterback, where it was Anthony and Jason Bean until you added Daniel Jones. Like, you can't go into the season like that. Corner looks great, but I would feel better if they had a backup nickel. And that could come in the form of a safety who can play nickel as well. Like when they had Julian Blackman, Nick Cross, that could do that. Because right now it's Kenny Moore with Alex Johnson. And Alex Johnson they may not even view him as a nickel. They may not have a backup nickel right now.
Well, and say they grab like a Von Bell, right, who can be like a backup safety, and say they even add another safety in the draft. Then if push comes to shove and Kenny gets hurt, Camryn Bynum can play some nickel. I mean, he's shown, I think his 2nd most snaps per position last year behind free safety was in the slot last season. I think it's been that way the last 3 years. So if you feel comfortable with your safety depth, then a guy like Bynum can jump to the nickel and play that quite well. He's best around the box anyway. So I just keep adding bodies to the secondary so you can keep with the versatility. I mean, I saw on film last season with Lou Anarumo, he had a couple of sets where he had 6, 7, 8 DBs on the field. There was an 8 DB set on the field last year. And even though we're looking at this Colts defensive backfield right now and feeling good, they currently can't really get up to 8 yet. So keep making it so you can feel comfortable throwing 6, 7, 8 guys on the field. I'm feeling good at outside corner right now. Safety, keep adding. Nickel corner, keep adding. Just put more quality guys on this roster and let's go from there. Add the competition. If you have to cut a good player, I'd rather be in the position where you have to cut a good player than keep a bad player on your
Yeah.
roster, So I think that's the situation we're at with the Colts, and I think they're going to keep on adding for sure.
We have unfortunately seen them have to do that. So before we hop off here, any more gut feelings on, minimal free agent moves that we still might see in the coming days?
Yeah, I mean, Von Bell, I think, is the obvious one to guess. That's not even like intel or anything for you guys. I mean, Von Bell, his best years have come with Lou Anarumo. I mean, he loves Lou Anarumo. Anarumo loves him. So I think we will see like a veteran minimum type signing there. Again, I certainly think we're going to see an edge rusher that can moonlight as an interior guy in the next couple days. I've been throwing out names like Charles Omenihu, but that might be too big of a signing considering how much cap they have left.
Mhm.
Maybe a guy like a Jonathan Bullard from Minnesota, since the Colts are taking all the Minnesota guys anyway. You might as well take a guy
Vice
like
versa.
Bullard. Yeah, like just only look at the Minnesota guys maybe. So maybe something like that. And then on the O-line, I certainly expect something there on the O-line. I don't think they're going to leave it only to the draft, especially when it comes to tackle, because I don't think they feel great about Blake Freeland as of right now. So I would expect something to come when it comes to tackle. But yeah, the Colts are not done adding. I think we will see a handful of additions. There'll certainly be a tight end addition at some point as well. Like they're not going to go into the draft with just Drew Ogletree on the roster. So I certainly expect a tight. I guess Jelani Woods is technically on the roster too. I just never think of him.
It's crazy
there.
It's crazy because like their tight end depth chart is still full of names that I have liked at one point or another. It's Ogletree, Will Mallory, Jelani Woods, Sean McEwen, who was at Michigan in college, and then Albert Okwuegbunam from Missouri. Like I have liked all those guys at some point, but we know this group ain't it. We cannot dislike the names. We have to go with what we've seen. They have got to add to the tight end room.
Yeah, I think we'll see a veteran addition there. But yeah, I would say a veteran tight end we're going to see at some point. 1 or 2 veteran offensive linemen, certainly another defensive tackle and edge rusher coming in, and probably a couple more defensive backs too. Like I think they're going to add quite a few veterans to this team. I don't think it's going to be a massive undrafted free agent class. So if we're looking at the roster right now, they're at 65. They need to be at 90 by the end of the offseason. So even if you say like 15 guys come in with the draft, right? That's still 10 more free agents they got to sign to fill up that 90. So I think we're going to see quite a few moves from the Colts going forward. But you guys let us know in the comment section, which free agents left would you take a swing on? Low end, high end, middle end? Tell me if you still think the Trey Hendrickson dream is alive for you and keep, thinking that up until it is eventually gone. But we're going to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen this evening. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now the season is over. Get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And you guys can become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop. Follow the link in our show notes. Also in our show notes, guys, the Indy Draft Guide is coming out here in April before the draft. It's been a lot of work, a lot of fun work getting that thing ready for you guys, but make sure you check that out as well. You get individualized scouting reports on every player in this class, the 225 scouting reports with their fit to the Colts. So definitely check that out as well. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, views, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.